It started with a single plea, soft, trembling, and impossible to ignore. A little girl looked up at her father and whispered, "Daddy, please help her." Within moments, a quiet single-dad SEAL was thrust into a confrontation with 5 dangerous men, unknowingly altering the course of his life and drawing the attention of a powerful Marine general. What unfolded next was a journey of courage, healing, and a bond no one saw coming. If you enjoy heartfelt tales of quiet heroes, unexpected miracles, and the kindness that changes lives, we warmly invite you to join our channel. Your support helps us bring more uplifting stories to you every week. Now let's begin this unforgettable journey. The sky over Harper Junction glowed the way only small-town evenings could, soft amber light, folding into deepening blue, the neon trim of the American diner flickering alive, like it had a pulse of its own. It was the hour between dinner and nightfall, when the world slowed just enough to let a man breathe. Dylan Mercer lived for this hour, not because it was peaceful, but because it belonged to his daughter. He stepped out of the diner with 2 grocery bags in one hand and the tiny, trusting fingers of 7-year-old Faye wrapped around the other. Her blonde hair caught the neon glow, giving her a halo that made more than one passerby smile. To Dylan, though she wasn't a little angel, she was the entire universe wrapped inside a cotton dress and scuffed sneakers. "Daddy," she chirped, swinging their arms, "can we stop by Mrs. Florence's on the way home?" "We already did," Dylan said, lowering his voice as he nudged her gently toward the crosswalk. "She slipped a cookie in your pocket when you weren't looking." Faye gasped, patting her dress until she found the treat. "She's magic." Dylan smiled. "She'd say the same about you." Moments like this were what he fought to protect, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable to the world, but sacred to him. He had spent enough years overseas, wearing a trident on his chest and steel in his veins. These days, he preferred softer things. Lunches packed with handwritten notes, bedtime stories whispered in the half-dark, and a life where danger didn't exist outside of Faye's imagination. At least that was what he hoped. They reached the parking lot, and Dylan scanned the area with the calm habit of someone who had been trained to see what others didn't. Nothing unusual, just a couple of teenagers near the jukebox inside a family loading leftovers. Into their truck, a few men laughing on the sidewalk near a green sedan. Normal. Safe. Predictable. Until Faye stopped walking. Her small fingers tightened around his, not in fear, but in a quiet, startled concern. She looked across the lot, her brows pinching in the way only children could manage, half innocence, half instinct. "Daddy, look." Dylan followed her gaze. At first he saw only the blue van parked under the street lamp. Then the scene sharpened piece by piece, like a lens clicking into focus. 4 men in dark jackets, a 5th standing by the driver's door. Their attention centered on someone, no, on her. A woman in military fatigues, barely in her 20s, shoulders, tense, jaw set. She moved like a trained soldier, but the numbers weren't in her favor. 1 man grabbed her arm. Another stepped in front of her, blocking escape. A 3rd opened the van's sliding door. And then Dylan saw something flicker across the woman's face. Not fear. Not yet. But calculation. Desperation pressed down by discipline. Faye's voice came out as a whisper, fragile, trembling, certain. "Daddy, please help her." A single sentence. 7 small words. And everything inside Dylan shifted. For a split second, the world hung suspended. The neon lights humming, the grocery bags rustling in the evening breeze, Faye's hand trembling in his. Dylan didn't move because he wanted to be a hero. He didn't move because he missed the thrill or because the SEAL in him demanded it. He moved because his daughter asked, and because she had never, not once in her life, asked him to protect anyone but herself. "Stay right behind me," he murmured, setting the grocery bags beside a parked car. Faye nodded, trusting him with the absolute certainty only a child could give. Dylan stepped forward, calm, deliberate, unthreatening, a father walking across a parking lot. Nothing more. But beneath the quiet exterior, muscle memory hummed awake. Footwork, angles, breathing. The invisible shift from civilian to protector. When the closest man noticed Dylan approaching, he straightened, trying to look tougher than he felt. "This ain't your business, buddy." Dylan didn't raise his voice. "She told you she doesn't want to go with you." The man smirked. "You got a death wish or something." Behind them the woman spoke, her voice clipped, controlled. "Sir, please stand back." Dylan gave her a glance, just long enough to let her know he heard her, just short enough to keep his attention on the threat. Her eyes, sharp and desperate, flickered to Faye and softened for half a heartbeat. The man blocking Dylan took a step closer. "Turn around, hero." Dylan didn't. Instead, with quiet precision, he shifted his foot half an inch. It was nothing. It was everything. A repositioning that spoke a language only trained men understood. Two of the thugs noticed. Their expressions changed. The woman noticed too, and something like astonishment crossed her face, as if she suddenly realized the calm man in the green shirt was not just a father with groceries. "Last chance," Dylan said softly. "Walk away." They didn't. Of course they didn't. What happened next unfolded fast, but without chaos, controlled movement, quiet efficiency, the kind of fight that didn't look like a fight at all. Dylan redirected force instead of meeting it. He avoided hurting anyone more than necessary. He positioned himself between Faye and danger at every turn. Seconds later, the woman was no longer trapped. The men were no longer advancing, and the van door slammed shut with frustrated panic. Dylan's breathing stayed steady. The woman's did not. She stared at him as if unsure whether he had just saved her, or revealed a truth she wasn't supposed to see. He reached for Faye, who ran to him without hesitation. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded, still wide-eyed. "Daddy." "You saved her." He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. Police sirens grew faint in the distance. Someone must have called. The woman in uniform straightened, brushing dirt from her sleeves, steadiness returning to her posture. She stepped closer, voice low but sincere. "Sir, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Dylan shook his head. "Make sure you're safe first." Their eyes met just an instant, but long enough for 3 lives to shift course. Long enough for fate to plant a seed that none of them yet recognized. As Faye held his hand, and the neon diner lights buzzed overhead, Dylan felt it. A moment cracking open, reshaping the future. Quietly, unexpectedly, irrevocably. The night had changed, and so had everything else. The flashing red and blue lights washed across the parking lot like restless tides, painting the diner's chrome edges in pulses of color. The crowd that had formed, half curious locals, half startled diners, began to scatter as the officers established a perimeter. Harper Junction wasn't used to scenes like this. Not anymore. Not since the old mill shut down and the town folded back into the quiet life. Dylan Mercer stood beside a patrol cruiser, hands resting calmly at his sides, as if he were simply waiting for a cup of coffee, instead of reporting an attempted abduction. Faye clung gently to his arm, her cheek pressing into his sleeve, her breathing soft but steady. She wasn't scared. She was anchoring him the way she always did. "Sir Officer Ramirez said, flipping through his notebook, I just need your account one more time." "From the moment you noticed the men approach the woman." Dylan nodded. They weren't approaching her. They already had her surrounded. She wasn't going willingly. Ramirez gave a stiff nod, jotting down the phrasing. "And you didn't hear any verbal threats." But body language was enough. Ramirez glanced up, brow tightening. "You read body language that well?" Dylan kept his expression neutral. Anyone who's lived long enough can tell when someone's in trouble. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. From across the lot, Vera Hart stood with an EMT checking a scrape on her arm. She looked both wired and exhausted, as if adrenaline was still threading through her veins, but her training wouldn't allow her to show it. Her eyes flicked toward Dylan every few seconds, quick glances, unreadable searching. The EMT murmured something. Vera shook her head. She clearly wanted to walk away from all of this. That made two of them. Another officer approached Ramirez, leaning close to whisper something. Both their eyes drifted to Dylan. Faye noticed first. "Daddy, why are they looking at you like that?" He lowered himself to her level, smoothing her hair behind her ear. "Because I helped, sweetheart. And now they need to understand what happened." She nodded solemnly, absorbing the weight of his words, as though she were far older than she looked. "Then you tell them. You did the right thing." Her innocence struck him harder than any fist from earlier. Ramirez cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, based on the footage we pulled from the diner's security camera, it looks like you handled yourself with, well, remarkable control. You have any training in self-defense?" Dylan met the officer's eyes without flinching. "Just enough to keep my daughter safe." A subtle, unspoken agreement passed between them. Ramirez didn't push further. Dylan didn't offer more. The officers stepped aside to compare notes, giving Dylan a moment of rare stillness. He watched as Vera approached, not with the rigid stride of a soldier reporting for duty, but with the hesitant pause of someone walking toward gratitude she wasn't used to expressing. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice carried the crispness of military discipline, but there was an undertone, fragile warm, that hadn't been there earlier. "Dylan," he corrected gently. Vera nodded. Her eyes moved to Faye first, softening as they always did around children. "You were very brave," she said to the little girl. Faye blinked. "I didn't do anything." "You asked him to help," Vera replied. "Sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do." Dylan felt Faye's fingers tighten around his hand. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. She needed reassurance that he was still here, still steady. Vera turned to him then. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Dylan said quietly. "I just did what anyone would have done." For a moment, Vera almost smiled. Almost. A faint, fleeting curve at the corner of her lips. "No," she said softly. "Not everyone would have stepped in." Her gaze lingered on him as if trying to read something beneath his calm exterior. Not suspicion, something closer to recognition. But before either could speak further, Officer Ramirez returned. "Ms. Hart will escort you to base once you're finished here. Your superiors want a full report." Vera straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir." Ramirez nodded at Dylan. "You're free to go, Mr. Mercer. If anything comes up, we'll contact you." Faye tugged his sleeve. "Can we go home now?" "Yes," he said, relieved for the first time that night. He picked up the paper bags he'd set down earlier, one now slightly crumpled from the scuffle. With his other hand, he lifted Faye into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, exhaustion finally catching her. He turned to leave until Vera stepped forward again, her voice quieter than before. "Dylan." He paused. "If you ever need anything at all, you call this number." She handed him a small card with no name, no title, just a direct line. "Government issue, meant for emergencies." He hesitated before taking it. "I'm not sure I'll ever need it." "I hope you don't," she said softly. "But I'd rather you have it anyway." There was something unspoken between them, something neither of them dared to acknowledge. Not attraction, at least. Not yet, but a connection forged in the space between danger and relief. Vera stepped back as the officers guided her toward the patrol car, but just before she slid into the back seat, she turned again. Her eyes found Dylan's through the fading wash of sirens, and she mouthed a word not loud enough for the officers to hear, but clear enough for him to understand. "Thank you." Dylan held Faye a little closer as he walked toward his truck. She had fallen asleep on his shoulder, her breathing steady, warm, safe. The quiet settled around him once more, but it wasn't the same as before. The night had a new weight, a new tension, a new hum beneath the surface. Something had been set in motion. Something that wouldn't be undone. Dylan strapped Faye into her seat, closed the door gently, and took a long breath before starting the engine. He didn't know why, but he felt it in his bones. Tonight changed more than he realized. And the ripple hadn't even begun. The morning sun rose slowly over Harper Junction, spreading a soft gold warmth across the small house at the end of Cypress Lane. It was the kind of morning that usually brought peace birds on fence posts, dew on the grass, the faint smell of pine drifting in through the open kitchen window. On any other day, Dylan Mercer would have welcomed that peace. But today, peace felt like a fragile illusion draped over something unsettled. He stood at the sink, rinsing out Faye's cereal bowl, still replaying the previous night, in fragments, the van, the men, the soldiers' frightened steadiness. Faye's voice pleading, "Daddy, please, help her." That sentence had echoed in his mind long after he'd put her to bed. It still echoed now. Dylan set the bowl aside and reached for the coffee pot, just as a sharp, authoritative knock cut through the quiet. 3 knocks. Precise. Measured. The kind that belonged to someone who expected to be obeyed. Dylan didn't tense, but his instincts sharpened instantly. He glanced toward the hallway. Faye was still asleep, thank God. The knock came again. He moved toward the door, with the composed stride of a man who had once approached far more dangerous thresholds. Through the slim window beside the frame, he saw a single figure standing on his porch. Tall, broad-shouldered, immaculate uniform, white-gloved discipline in the set of the jaw. A Marine dress uniform, not a recruiter, not a messenger, a general. Dylan opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" The man removed his cover, revealing a stern face, etched with decades of command and decisions too heavy for most men to bear. His hair was steel gray, his eyes a deep assessing blue. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice steady as a granite cliff. "I'm General Donovan Hart, United States Marine Corps." Dylan felt the air shift, not from intimidation, but from recognition. He had seen men like this before. Men carved by service. Men who carried whole histories in the way they stood. "What can I do for you? General Hart didn't waste time. My daughter is alive this morning because you stepped in last night." The words hit Dylan with unexpected force. "Daughter?" The woman in fatigues, the one being shoved into the van, was this man's child. The general held out a folded document, not a legal notice, not a threat, but something formal enough to underscore the weight of his visit. "Her name is Captain Vera Hart." Dylan accepted the paper, but didn't open it. She didn't say she was military. She wouldn't. The general replied. Her mission was still active and classified. A ripple of unease traveled through Dylan, not fear, but understanding. If a Marine general had shown up at his front door less than 12 hours later, the situation was bigger than a parking lot assault. General Hart continued. "The men you confronted last night are part of a group we've been tracking for months. Human trafficking weapons, movement, domestic infiltration. They operate in the shadows, and they're getting bolder." Dylan's jaw tightened slightly. "And your daughter was one of their targets." "She was undercover," the general clarified, "until they realized who she was." A brief silence settled between them. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that forms when two men take each other's measure not as adversaries, but as potential allies. Finally, the general spoke again, quieter, but no less firm. "Mr. Mercer, Dylan, my daughter wouldn't be standing today if you hadn't intervened." Dylan shifted his weight. "I just did what anyone would have done." General Hart's expression hardened. "No," he said. "Not everyone would have walked toward danger, especially with a child at their side." The general's gaze dropped for the first time to the hallway, where a small pair of shoes sat neatly by the wall. "You protected her as well. That tells me something important about the kind of man you are." Dylan didn't respond. Compliments were never comfortable for him, especially from men who spoke with medals on their chests. General Hart inhaled deeply, as though preparing to cross a line he rarely crossed. "What I'm about to say is not protocol. It's personal." Dylan felt the shift before he heard the words. "I need your help." There it was. Not a request, not a demand, but a truth wrapped in humility, a rare thing from a man of his stature. "You have skills," the general continued. "Skills you tried very hard to hide from those officers last night." Dylan's pulse slowed not from anxiety, but from the old familiar instinct to anticipate the next move. "General, I'm retired," he said carefully. "My only priority now is my daughter, and that's exactly why I'm here." General Hart stepped closer, not threatening but commanding attention all the same. These men don't forget faces. They don't let go of failed operations. Last night exposed their weakness, but it also exposed you, meaning walking away was no longer an option. Dylan didn't answer. His silence was his admission that the general wasn't wrong. The general placed a card on the table beside the door. No emblem, no name, just a number. "Before I came here this morning, I asked myself what kind of man risks his life for a stranger, while shielding a child behind him." His voice softened barely, and the answer was simple: a man I need on my side. Dylan lifted his gaze, meeting the general's eyes directly. "What exactly are you asking me to do, a role?" the general said. "Informal, temporary, advisory. Off the books, but fully authorized. Your knowledge could help us prevent something far worse than what happened last night." Dylan's jaw flexed. "And if I say no?" The general's expression didn't change. "Then I thank you for saving my daughter, and I pray that danger doesn't find its way back to your doorstep." The weight of those words settled deep, because Dylan knew one thing with absolute certainty: danger always came back. Before either man could speak again, a soft voice sounded from behind Dylan. Daddy Faye rubbed her sleepy eyes, peeking around the doorframe. General Hart straightened instinctively, the hardness in his gaze softening a fraction when it landed on the little girl. "Good morning, young lady." Faye offered him a shy wave. Dylan rested a protective hand on her shoulder. "We'll talk later, General." Hart nodded once, sharp, respectful, resolute. "I'll be waiting for your call." He stepped back, placed his cover under his arm, and walked down the porch steps with the steady, unhurried gait of a man who had delivered a message that could not be ignored. Dylan closed the door slowly, staring at the small card the general had left behind. He didn't want this life back. He didn't want the weight, the danger, the shadows that came with it. But as Faye leaned into his side, trusting him with her whole world, he knew the truth. Sometimes a man didn't choose the fight. Sometimes the fight chose him. And this one had already found its way to his front door. All that day, Dylan Mercer carried a quiet weight that clung to him like a second shadow. It followed him from the kitchen to the living room, from the backyard to the workshop, where he sometimes escaped to breathe. But no matter where he went, the presence of that folded card on the table, General Donovan Hart's card, seemed to follow him. It wasn't the card itself that troubled him. It was everything it represented, everything it threatened to wake inside him. Outside, the sun rose high over Harper Junction, bright and friendly, as if the town knew nothing of the conversation that had taken place that morning. Neighbors walked dogs, kids rode bicycles. The world resumed its predictable rhythm. But inside Dylan's chest, something shifted, restless and uneasy. He tried shaking it off by returning to normal routines. Normalcy had always been his anchor. He made lunch, played music on the old radio, helped Faye paint a paper garden for her upcoming school project. For a while, the colors and laughter seemed strong enough to drown out the tension tightening at the back of his mind. But when Faye reached for a new paintbrush and accidentally brushed his arm with her tiny paint-speckled fingers, he felt a familiar protectiveness rise, and with it the realization that no amount of normalcy could protect her from what he now knew. When she wasn't looking, his gaze drifted again and again to the card on the table. A number, a choice, a threat disguised as an opportunity. Around mid-afternoon, Mrs. Florence Miller, their elderly neighbor, stopped by with a small container of peach cobbler. "Saw the police lights last night," she said, voice gentle but probing. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Dylan forced a reassuring smile. Just a misunderstanding at the diner. Florence didn't push, but her eyes lingered on him longer than usual. She had known him long enough to sense when something troubled him. She gave Faye a warm hug, squeezed Dylan's arm, and left with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had silently promised herself she'd keep an eye on them. When the house quieted again, Dylan finally allowed the truth to surface. The danger wasn't gone. It had only stepped back to watch. The traffickers, or whatever that organization really was, had seen his face. Not just seen him, engaged him, been stopped by him. Men like that didn't simply forget. And men like Dylan, men with a past steeped in classified missions, dark corridors and silent resolve, understood too well how revenge operated in the shadows. He stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes on Foy, as she played with her stuffed rabbit on the living room rug. She was humming to herself, building a little pillow fort, unaware that the world beyond their walls had grown sharper, darker, more dangerous. His heartbeat thudded loudly. Not out of fear, he had faced far worse, but out of calculation. If he ignored the general's warning, he would risk leaving himself blind to threats approaching his home. If he accepted the general's offer, he would step back into the world he'd walked away from years ago. Either path carried a cost. The SEAL in him recognized the tactical truth. You cannot defend against what you refuse to see, but the father in him pushed back with equal force. Faye deserves a life free from her father's past, free from danger, free from shadows. The two voices warred inside him, each pulling, each insisting. Later that evening, Dylan grilled chicken on the back porch, while Faye set the outdoor table. The smell of charcoal filled the air, accompanied by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of early autumn leaves. Daddy Faye said suddenly, her voice small but serious, "That lady from last night, is she okay?" Dylan froze mid-turn of the spatula. Kids always asked the questions adults weren't ready for. "She's all right," he said softly. "She's very brave. Like you." He swallowed. "No, sweetheart. I just did what needed to be done." Faye looked up at him with the kind of sincerity only children could summon. "But if you didn't help her, she would still be hurt. So you are brave." Dylan felt something tighten in his throat, because the truth was simple. He could face any enemy. He could face any threat. But facing the idea of letting his daughter down, that was a battlefield he never wanted to enter. The conversation lingered long after Faye ran inside to grab napkins. Dylan stood alone on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in streaks of orange and blue. He knew then that inaction was a risk he couldn't afford. Pretending the problem didn't exist wouldn't erase the memory of the men who had tried to drag Vera into that van, wouldn't stop them from wondering who the quiet stranger was who disrupted their plans. wouldn't prevent them from finding out more. And the instant they decided he was a threat, or worse, that he was a loose end, they'd come for him. Or for Faye. The decision wasn't really about serving again. It was about surviving. When Faye had gone to bed and the house was finally still, Dylan walked to the small wooden table where the general's card lay waiting. He stared at it for several long, heavy breaths. He didn't want to call. He didn't want to re-enter a world that had taken so much from him already. But the alternative, leaving his daughter exposed to a danger he couldn't predict, was something he could never live with. His hand hovered over the card, shaking slightly, a tremor not of fear, but of acceptance. He closed his fingers around it. Not a choice made lightly, not a choice made willingly, but a choice made as a father. And fathers, above all else, protect their children, even if it means stepping back into the shadows they once escaped. Dylan slipped the card into his pocket, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the silence of his home. For you, Faye. Always for you. The dilemma was over. The decision was made. And a new storm, quiet, distant, but inevitable, was already beginning to gather at the edge of his world. The knock on the door came mid-morning the next day, gentle, measured nothing, like the firm, commanding strikes General Hart had delivered the previous morning. This knock carried no authority. It carried something else, something quieter. Dylan wiped paint from his hands. He and Faye had been building the cardboard castle for her school project, and moved toward the door. He paused just long enough to feel the shift in the air, the subtle warning that came not from fear, but from instinct. When he opened the door, the last two faces he expected to see stood on the porch. General Donovan Hart and his daughter, Captain Vera Hart. She looked much different than she had the night of the attempted abduction. Less shaken, less guarded. Still wearing her duty but not dutiful expression, but now with a steadiness that belonged to someone who had walked through fire and survived it. But there was something else, too. Something in her eyes, a softness that hadn't been there before. Mr. Mercer, the general greeted. Dylan. General. Then he turned to Vera. Captain Hart. She shook her head lightly. Just Vera today. A brief, unexpected pause settled between them, broken by the sound of small footsteps thumping across the hardwood floor inside. Daddy, who was Faye, stopped mid-sentence when she saw the visitors. She blinked wide-eyed, then smiled the pure, unfiltered smile that disarmed even the sternest of hearts. It's you, she exclaimed, pointing gently toward Vera. You're okay. Vera's composure cracked just enough for a genuine smile to slip through a rare sight, judging by the surprised glance the general gave her. Yes, Vera said softly. I'm okay, thanks to your dad. Faye looked up at Dylan with the kind of pride that could break a man open. I told you she'd be okay. Yes, you did, Dylan said, brushing a hand over her hair. General Hart stepped forward. May we come in for a moment? Dylan hesitated, not because he distrusted them, but because letting anyone from his old world into his home felt like opening a sealed vault. Still, he stepped aside. Of course. Come in. Inside the home carried the unmistakable imprint of a father raising a daughter alone. Soft blankets draped over the couch, a little bookshelf stuffed with picture books, crayon drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator, and on the kitchen table, a half-finished cardboard castle splattered with glitter and watercolor paint. Vera paused to take in the scene. Her gaze lingered on the paintbrushes, the creativity scattered across the table, the small pink plastic chair placed beside Dylan's seat. It's beautiful, she said quietly, almost more to herself than to anyone else. Faye ran straight back to the project and picked up a miniature flag they had crafted. Do you want to help us? We're making a castle. Vera blinked. Of all the things she had anticipated happening today, being invited to add a glitter flag to a cardboard castle was not on the list. But she lowered to a knee and smiled. "I've never built a castle before. You might have to show me how." Faye grinned and immediately began explaining structural integrity in the way only a child could, mostly through enthusiasm and very little actual architecture. Vera listened like the briefing was the most important mission she had ever received. General Hart cleared his throat, redirecting Dylan's attention. "I didn't come to pressure you today," he said. "That's not my intention. Yesterday's conversation was a lot." "That's one word for it," Dylan replied dryly. The general almost smiled. "I wanted to give you time, and I wanted my daughter to thank you properly." Vera stood and faced Dylan. Her posture straightened automatically, the soldier in her rising to the surface, but her eyes remained soft, too soft for formality. "I didn't get to say it clearly," she began. "You didn't just save my life. You prevented something that could have spiraled far beyond me. Those men are connected to something larger, something dangerous, and you stepped in without hesitation." Dylan shook his head. "I didn't know who you were. I just couldn't walk away." Vera nodded, absorbing that with visible emotion. "That means the most." Faye tugged gently on Vera's sleeve. "Do soldiers get scared?" The question hit Vera like a gentle blow. She crouched down to eye level with Faye. "Yes," she said honestly. "We do. But brave people aren't the ones who never get scared. They're the ones who do the right thing, even when they are scared." Faye nodded solemnly. "Like Daddy." Dylan looked away for a moment, fighting the unexpected warmth that rose in his chest. General Hart stepped forward, then his tone shifting just slightly. Still formal, still controlled, but touched with sincerity. "Dylan, I've seen many men in crisis. I've led Marines into battles that most civilian eyes will never understand. But what you did..." He paused, searching for words. "It takes a certain kind of character to act with that level of discipline and restraint in a civilian environment." Dylan didn't respond. Praise made him uncomfortable. Always had. "It's not just that you fought," the general continued. "It's how you fought. The precision, the control, the fact that your daughter stayed safe the entire time." He exhaled. "You are not an ordinary man." Before Dylan could speak, Faye piped up cheerfully. "He's my daddy." The general smiled faintly. The rare kind, small but genuine. A very good one. Silence settled again, but it wasn't tense. It was warm, slow, human. Vera watched Dylan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, admiration, and something gentler, quieter, almost like curiosity wrapped in respect. "I wanted to come myself," she said softly. "Not because I owe you, but because I wanted you to know I'm okay. Truly okay." Dylan met her gaze. "I'm glad." And she added voice, hesitating just enough to reveal honesty beneath the uniform, "that you made me feel safe." Those words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Not dramatic, not romantic, just real. Vera looked away, first clearing her throat. "Anyway, thank you." Faye rushed over and grabbed Vera's hand. "Can you stay and help with the castle?" The general answered before Vera could. "Captain Hart has duties to attend to." But Vera surprised them both. "Actually, I can stay for a few minutes." The general's brows lifted. Dylan's did too. And for the first time since the chaos at the diner, an unexpected softness settled over the room, gentle, hopeful, and entirely unplanned. Something was beginning. Something none of them could name yet. But each of them felt it just the same. For the first time in a long while, the night pressed itself against Dylan Mercer's home, with a heaviness that didn't feel natural. It wasn't the kind of heaviness born from emotional weight, though he carried plenty of that too. It was something else entirely. A disturbance, a shift, a presence he could neither see nor name, but one he felt in the marrow of his bones. The day had ended sweetly. Vera had stayed long enough to help glue the final wall onto Faye's cardboard castle, earning paint stains on her knuckles, and a burst of giggles from Faye when the tower leaned sideways. Even General Hart, stoic as a granite statue, had watched with an expression just a shade warmer than neutral. When they left, Vera had promised Faye she'd stop by again if duty allowed. It should have been a comforting moment. But comfort only lasts if the world allows it to. That night, after Faye was tucked into bed and the house drifted into stillness, Dylan found himself at the kitchen window, staring out into the backyard. The porch light illuminated only a small circle, leaving the rest swallowed in shadows. He didn't like how the shadows felt tonight. His instincts, once dulled by domestic routines, were now wide awake, watching, adjusting, listening. At first he thought it was just nerves. The General's visit, Vera's presence, the weight of yesterday's events. Any man would feel unsettled. But Dylan didn't mistake nerves for intuition. He'd spent too long in the field not to understand the difference. And tonight, intuition told him something was wrong. He turned off the kitchen light to reduce reflection and scanned the tree line again. For a moment, nothing moved, nothing breathed. Then, a flicker. Just a flicker. Something reflective, something small. A car window, a camera lens too far to tell, too quick to confirm. He exhaled slow and controlled. Could be nothing. Could be everything. He left the window and checked the locks quietly, methodically, without giving away alarm. When he walked into the living room, he paused at the sight that met him. Faye's stuffed rabbit had fallen off the couch onto the floor, its tiny, stitched heart faced upward, catching a sliver of moonlight. He knelt to pick it up, his thumb brushing over the worn fabric. She loved this thing, slept with it every night. The thought of any threat brushing against her world, however small, sent a cold ripple down his spine. He placed the rabbit beside her bedroom door, where she'd see it in the morning. He kissed the top of her head as she slept, then slipped back into the hallway. Sleep was a distant luxury tonight. Instead, he sat on the couch and waited, still steady silently. Alert the way he'd once waited on cold desert rooftops, listening for danger carried on the wind. Hours passed. Nothing happened, but unease lingered like a shadow beneath the skin. By morning, he convinced himself it was only vigilance kicking in a residual reaction from a night that had changed the course of their lives. Still, the tension in his shoulders didn't fade, not even with coffee in hand and the soft thump of Faye's feet running toward him for morning hugs. "Daddy, is today safe?" she asked with innocent cheer. "Yes, sweetheart," he said automatically. But the answer didn't sit well with him. They went about their morning routines, brush teeth, pack lunch, tighten ponytail. But every movement Dylan made felt taut, stretched thin. He watched the street with sharper eyes as he walked Faye to the bus stop. Mrs. Florence waved from across the street. 2 joggers passed by. A postal truck clattered over a loose manhole cover. Everything looked normal. But normal didn't mean safe. As the school bus rounded the corner, Dylan crouched to tuck a strand of hair behind Faye's ear. "Listen," he said softly. "If anything ever feels strange, even a little, you tell me, or Mrs. Florence, or your teacher." Right away, Faye blinked in confusion. Like, strange how he kissed her forehead. "You'll know." She accepted that with the unquestioning trust children give their parents and climbed onto the bus with a cheerful wave. When the bus disappeared, Dylan remained standing there longer than necessary, staring after it. Only when the street fully emptied did he return home. And that was when he noticed it, A tire mark, faint, fresh, pressed into the dewy curbside grass directly across from his driveway. But Dylan hadn't parked there. Neither had Florence. No delivery trucks. No visitors. He crouched down, brushing 2 fingers across the imprint. Wide tires. Heavy vehicle. Clean tread government or high-end aftermarket. Someone had parked there last night. Watching. Waiting. Possibly long before he noticed the flicker of reflection in the woods. A muscle tensed in Dylan's jaw. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing. Now he knew. The danger wasn't hypothetical, wasn't paranoia, wasn't something the general had exaggerated. It was here. It had already arrived. Inside the house, the phone buzzed. Dylan stepped in and saw a message, a number he didn't recognize. Unknown as this, Dylan Mercer. He didn't reply. A second message followed. Unknown. This is General Hart. If you have noticed anything unusual, call me. Dylan stared at the screen. He hadn't called the general yet. Hadn't committed. Hadn't agreed. But somehow the general already knew that the shadows were shifting around Dylan's home. He typed only 2 words. We talk. He hesitated. His thumb hovered over the send button. Then he looked up. Through the window, sunlight glinted off something metallic tucked behind a distant oak tree. Not a gun. Not binoculars. But a camera. A surveillance camera. Facing his home. Dylan's heartbeat slowed not from panic, but from resolve. He pressed send. And in that quiet moment, the world changed again. Because Dylan Mercer understood something with absolute clarity, silence wouldn't protect Faye. Running wouldn't protect Faye. Only confronting the threat head-on would keep his daughter safe. And now danger had crossed the line into his world. So he would cross a line of his own. Not as a SEAL, not as a soldier, but as a father. And fathers never run from shadows. They walk toward them. Steady. Silent. Ready for whatever comes next. The call connected after only a single ring, as though General Donovan Hart had been waiting with the phone in hand. Mercer. His voice was low, unshaken, carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much and expected more to come. Tell me what you've noticed. Dylan stood in his living room, staring out the window toward the tree line, where the faint glint of a camera lens had vanished minutes earlier. He didn't bother pacing. Pacing was for men who hadn't accepted their reality yet. Someone was out there, Dylan said. Last night. And again this morning. Describe the vehicle. Wide tire tread, heavy frame. Could be a modified SUV or van. No sound. No lights. The general exhaled sharply, a sound not of surprise but confirmation. You were right to call. Dylan gripped the phone tighter. I didn't call for approval. I called because this is no longer about your investigation. They found my house. A brief pause. Then, which means you're out of time. Those words did not raise Dylan's pulse. They settled into him like a truth he'd expected to hear, inevitable, unwelcome but real. You said you needed my help, Dylan said quietly. You have it. But I need assurances. You'll have them. My daughter stays safe. She will. Donovan replied, no hesitation in his voice. You have my word as an officer and as a father. Dylan almost believed him. Almost. But even generals couldn't command fate. Still, this was the only way forward. I want details, Dylan said. Everything you know. You'll have them at DO 900, the general answered. My driver will pick you up. I'm not leaving Faye. I didn't expect you to. We'll arrange security. Another pause, less stiff this time, touched with something like respect. You're doing the right thing, Mercer. Dylan didn't answer. Not because he disagreed, but because doing the right thing didn't make the right thing easy. The next morning, gunmetal gray clouds rolled over Harper Junction, smothering the usual warmth of early sun. Dylan stood on the porch with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder, not packed for travel, just for preparedness. Habit. Muscle memory. A black government SUV pulled into the driveway at exactly 01900. Not a second earlier, not a second later. Vera stepped out of the passenger side. Dylan wasn't expecting her. He felt a shift in the air, something subtle, something unspoken. But from the faint softness in her eyes, he could tell she'd insisted on coming. "Good morning," she said, voice controlled but warm. "Morning." Faye ran out behind him, her braids bouncing. She waved at Vera with the affection of a child who had already decided this woman was safe. "Are you coming to help again with the castle?" Faye asked hopefully. Vera crouched down to meet her eyes. "I wish I could peanut. But today, I have to help your dad." Faye looked up at Dylan. Because of the bad men, Dylan held her close. Because grown-ups sometimes need help too. Vera stood again, watching the exchange, with a tenderness she tried and failed to hide. "We've arranged protection," she said. "2 plainclothes officers will stay nearby. The school bus will be monitored, and Mrs. Florence has agreed to keep an eye on the house." Dylan nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she replied softly. "Keeping her safe, that matters to me too." He didn't respond, but something softened in his chest. The briefing facility. It was not a base, not an office, not anything recognizable from Dylan's former world. It was a quiet, unmarked building on the edge of a decommissioned industrial park, exactly the kind of place operations began, when no one was supposed to know they existed. Inside, General Hart stood at a table spread with files, photographs, and maps. He lifted his gaze when Dylan entered. Mercer. Hart. A mutual nod. Respectful. Measured. Vera joined Dylan's side, as if instinctively forming a buffer between him and the cold sterility of the room. The general began. "The men you confronted are part of a trafficking and weapons conduit operating across state lines. Highly organized, highly mobile. We've been tracking them for months." He tapped a photo of the ringleader. "His name is Anton Resnick, Eastern European background. Former military, dishonorably discharged. He's smart, resourceful, and vindictive. If he saw your face, he did." Dylan confirmed. "Then he sees you as a threat." Dylan said nothing. The confirmation didn't change what he already knew. The general continued. "We intercepted chatter early this morning. Someone mentioned the interference from last night." "That's you." "Of course it is," Dylan murmured. Vera stepped closer to the table, shoulders squared. "They won't let it go?" Resnick never does. Dylan took in the files, the maps, the photographs. He had hoped stepping away from that world would make him forget how to read them, but the opposite was true. His mind snapped back into tactical clarity, analyzing routes, escape patterns, symbols, markers of communication. "You need patterns, predictability, and behavioral projection," Dylan said. "And you're missing the one variable Resnick didn't account for." Hart raised an eyebrow. Which is, Dylan looked directly at him. "Me." The general nodded slowly. "That's why we want you on this." But Dylan shook his head. "You don't want me to join. You want me to consult." "We want you to stay alive," Vera said quietly. Their eyes met. Just a moment. But it was enough to acknowledge the truth neither dared speak aloud, that her gratitude had begun to shift into something deeper, something she didn't yet know how to name. General Hart cleared his throat. "You'll work with Vera. She'll be your primary point of contact. She knows the operation and she understands the risk to your family." Dylan caught the general's subtle pause. Understands the risk, understands his daughter, understands him. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "I'm in. But I set my limits. Faye comes first." The general straightened. "As it should be." Vera's voice softened. "We'll get through this, Dylan. Together." It was the first time she'd said his name without formality, and something about it, something impossibly small, yet profoundly real, settled into him like an anchor. As they left the facility hours later, a cold wind blew across the empty lot. Clouds gathered overhead, silent and heavy. Vera walked beside him, not in front or behind, as an equal. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," Dylan replied. "It's already here." She nodded. "Then we do it together." The wind picked up again, scattering dry leaves across their path, and Dylan Mercer took his first full step back into the world he thought he'd left behind, not as a soldier, not as a SEAL, not as a weapon, but as a father standing between his daughter and the darkness drawing near. The next week unfolded with a rhythm that felt strangely familiar to Dylan Mercer, structured, tactical, quiet, yet charged with purpose. It was a rhythm he had once lived by, one he thought he had buried beneath layers of ordinary life. But now, as he moved between school drop-offs, late-night briefings, and covert observation training with Vera Hart, the past felt closer than ever. Yet this time, something fundamental was different. He wasn't serving a flag. He wasn't answering to a uniform. He was protecting his daughter. And somewhere along the edge of that mission, another presence was growing steady and unexpected. Vera. The first formal training session took place in a converted warehouse attached to the quiet briefing facility. The place smelled of dust metal and faint traces of oil. Folding tables held maps and devices. A makeshift track ran down the center of the floor. It was the kind of place where professional danger felt at home. Vera waited for him by a table, arms crossed over her fatigues, confidence radiating even when she wasn't trying. But when she looked up and saw Dylan walking toward her, something softened in her expression, something that didn't belong in a warehouse or a battlefield. "Morning," she said, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Morning," Dylan replied, setting his bag down. She tapped a folder. "I've outlined your role as an outside consultant. Nothing too invasive. The General wants your insights on pattern prediction, response timing, and threat escalation indicators." Dylan skimmed the folder. "So you want me to look at what you have and tell you what you missed?" Vera smirked. "If you think you can." He lifted an eyebrow. "Is that a challenge?" Her smile widened, quiet, competitive, warm. "Maybe." As they walked the perimeter of the warehouse, Dylan analyzed the investigative map pinned to the far wall. The routes, the safe houses, the known associates, the organization's supply chain, everything the task force knew and everything they didn't. "You're focusing too tightly on highway movement," he noted. "Resnick doesn't rely on predictable routes. He tests new ones. He'll avoid any corridor you monitor." Vera's eyes brightened, not with defensiveness, but with admiration. "That's exactly what I've been trying to convince the team." She stepped closer, studying the map with him. "You see things fast. That's the job." "No," she corrected softly. "That's you." Silence briefly settled between them, not heavy, not awkward, but charged with recognition. During the second session, Dylan spotted something no one else had noticed, a misalignment in the digital timestamps on Resnick's communications. It was small, barely visible, but to a trained eye subtlety spoke volumes. "You see that delay pattern?" Dylan asked, pointing to 3 lines of decrypted text. Vera leaned in her shoulder, brushing his arm. "The 3-minute interval. That's not random. It's a relay delay. Someone in the chain is forwarding messages manually before they enter the encrypted stream." Vera straightened, stunned. Meaning Resnick is working through at least one human courier. Someone physically carrying information between nodes. Her eyes widened. "That narrows this down. A courier has to be close, predictable, exposed, and sloppy." Dylan added, "A digital footprint always reveals something." Vera turned to him slowly. "You just broke open the part of this case we've been stuck on for a month." Dylan shrugged lightly. Sometimes it takes a new perspective. But Vera knew better. It wasn't perspective. It was instinct, married to experience, sharpened by purpose. For a moment, she simply studied him, his calm posture, the way he folded his arms, the way his gaze scanned the room automatically, as though charting invisible threat lines. "You're different from what I expected," she said softly. "What did you expect?" She hesitated long enough that he looked up to meet her eyes. "I expected someone closed off, someone cold. But you're—" She searched for the right word. "Steady." Dylan swallowed lightly, unsure how to receive that. Steady. No one had ever described him quite that way before. Later that afternoon, Vera accompanied Dylan to pick up Faye from school. It wasn't part of any protocol, she simply wanted to. The girl had warmed to her so quickly that Vera found herself thinking about her unexpectedly during briefings and long drives. When Faye saw them waiting outside the school gates, she sprinted toward them with unrestrained joy. "Vera," she squealed, skipping the formality of rank entirely. Vera crouched and caught her in a gentle hug, something she probably hadn't given anyone in years. "Hey there, Peanut. Did you have a good day?" "We made dragons in art class," Faye beamed. "My dragon is purple, and it has glitter." Dylan chuckled. "Of course it does." Faye looked between them with a knowing sort of curiosity that children often had. "Are you two working together again?" Vera nodded. "We are," Good Faye said, as if setting the terms of their relationship. "Daddy works better when someone nice helps him," Faye Dylan murmured, embarrassed, but Vera's smile told him she didn't mind. In fact, it warmed her. As they walked home, Faye skipping ahead, kicking rocks and humming to herself, Vera slowed her steps until she matched Dylan's pace. "I want to say something," she began. He glanced at her. "Go on. You didn't just help our investigation. You helped me." Dylan frowned. "You don't owe me." "This isn't about owing," she interrupted gently. "It's about acknowledging something real." He waited. "When I looked into your eyes that night at the diner," she said, "I felt safe." That doesn't happen to me easily. Not in my line of work. Not in my life. Dylan exhaled a slow, grounding breath. "I'm just trying to do right by my daughter," he said. Vera smiled softly. "Maybe. But sometimes doing the right thing has a way of drawing people together." He met her gaze, steady, searching, unguarded. For the first time since they met, there was no danger pressing in around them. No mission. No investigation. No shadows. Just two people walking slowly through the quiet edges of a small town, while a little girl hummed a happy melody in the distance. Something was forming. Something quiet. Something real. Something that had nothing to do with duty, and everything to do with the fragile, unexpected space opening between their hearts. Night had washed over Harper Junction by the time Dylan finished securing the house. He double-checked the windows, confirmed the deadbolts, and stood for a full minute beside the porch, light, listening to the wind sift through the trees. Everything looked still. Peaceful, even. But peace was no longer a guarantee. It was a variable, and variables could shift without warning. Faye had been tucked into bed hours earlier, tucked under her star-patterned blanket with her stuffed rabbit pressed under her chin. Her breathing drifted from the room in soft, soothing waves, the kind of sound that reminded Dylan why every choice he made had to be the right one. Yet tonight, his thoughts refused to settle. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, replaying the general's earlier debrief, a session that had shaken loose a piece of the past he had hoped would stay buried. A photograph. A name. A face he recognized. One of Resnick's confirmed associates, a man who had once appeared on an overseas target board during Dylan's final deployment as a SEAL. Untouchable then. Untouchable now. But unmistakable. The realization had hit Dylan with cold clarity. The enemy wasn't new. It was familiar. And familiarity came with consequences he could no longer ignore. Dylan had always known his past could resurface. It was the unspoken truth, carved into the bones of anyone who once lived in the shadows. You could build a home, raise a child, and pretend that the world had moved on, but the world had a long memory. And so did the men who lived in its darker corners. He walked to the back window, staring into the yard, where the moon cast silver ribbons across the grass. Once upon a time, this yard had been his sanctuary. The swing set, the flower patch, Faye watered too much. The old apple tree she insisted would one day grow a fairy house inside it. But lately, the yard felt different. Watched. Breached. Like an old battlefield he had unknowingly returned to. He felt the burden of it then, that old suffocating weight of responsibility. The quiet hero's burden. The knowledge that he alone, only him, stood between danger and the ones he loved. It wasn't courage. It wasn't duty. It was a kind of ache, deep and enduring, the ache of a man who understood what failure would cost. The knock came softly. Too softly for a threat. Too gently for an officer. Only one person knocked like that. Dylan opened the door, and there she was, Vera Hart, standing in the dim porch light, wearing a dark jacket and her usual expression of composed determination. But there was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Concern. For him. "Can I come in?" she asked. He stepped aside. Of course. Vera entered quietly, scanning the room with precise, unreadable eyes. Part soldier, part woman, carrying unspoken thoughts. "I expected you'd be awake," she said. "I expected you'd show up," Dylan replied. She gave a small, knowing smile. Not flirtatious, not formal, just real. "The general told me about the picture. The man you recognized." Dylan nodded. "He and Resnick were connected years ago. We never got close enough to confirm." Vera walked toward the window, her posture tightening. "If you recognized him, he might recognize you." "I know. And if he recognizes you," she continued carefully, "they might escalate." "I know that too." She exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly, not in defeat, but in fear of what this meant for him. And for Faye. "You shouldn't carry this alone," she whispered. "I'm not alone," Dylan said. "You're here." Something flickered across her face at those words. Something vulnerable. Something unguarded. But moments like that between two soldiers didn't last long. Duty reclaimed her quickly. "We need to talk about next steps," she said, returning to mission mode. "Sit." Dylan gestured. Vera sat on the couch, hands clasped lightly in her lap. He sat opposite her, posture firm but open. "I spoke with the general again," she said. "We believe Resnick's network is accelerating. Your involvement, it complicates things. How you're both an asset and a liability." She paused, eyes softening. A valuable asset and a human liability. Dylan didn't ask for clarification. He already understood. His presence strengthened their investigation, but it also painted a target on anyone near him. Vera continued. "My father is preparing contingency plans around you and Faye. Increased surveillance, transport options." She hesitated. "Safe houses?" "I'm not leaving my home," Dylan said instantly. "I know." Her voice was gentle now. "But we are working to protect you." The room quieted again, and for a moment the tension dissolved, not because the danger was gone, but because the connection between them was stronger than fear. "You know," Vera said softly, "when I first saw you at the diner, I thought you were just a quiet, gentle dad." "I am," Dylan replied. "No." She shook her head, eyes glowing with something like awe. "You're a quiet, gentle dad who can dismantle 5 armed men with a child standing behind him." He gave a reluctant smile. "I try not to advertise that." I noticed. A smile touched her lips. It's part of what makes you so steady. The word again. Steady. Vera rose, pacing slowly. Dylan, there's something else you need to hear. The general didn't want to worry you, but I insisted you know. Dylan straightened. What is it? She turned toward him fully, her expression solemn. One of Resnick's men asked about you specifically. Your description. Your daughter. A cold, sharp silence fell over the room. They know about Faye, she added. Dylan didn't move, didn't flinch, but something dark, ancient, and fiercely protective stirred in him, a force trained and tempered through years of war. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. What did they say? Vera swallowed. Just that they're looking for the man who interfered, and the girl he protected. The air seemed to thicken. Finally, Dylan stood slowly, deliberately. This ends now, he said. Vera stepped closer, her voice quiet. We'll stop them, together. Dylan met her gaze, the tension in his chest softening slightly as he held her eyes. He had allies. He wasn't alone. And Vera, strong, fierce, steady in her own way, was becoming something more than an ally. Something he hadn't expected. Something he didn't know he was allowed to feel. But there'd be time for that later. Tonight they prepared. Tonight Dylan accepted the full weight of the quiet hero's burden. And he bore it not because he wanted to, but because Faye needed him to. And because somewhere inside him, Vera did too. Dawn crept into Harper Junction like a whispered promise. Soft gold light brushing the tops of the trees, mist lifting off the ground in slow, ghostly swirls, birds singing as though the world had never known fear. It was the kind of morning that felt impossibly peaceful. And yet peace, Dylan knew, was never accidental. Peace was earned, protected, fought for. This morning, for the first time in weeks, he sensed that the danger pressing against his world was no longer advancing. It was receding. But not because the threat was gone, because they had finally cornered it. The debriefing room inside the unmarked facility hummed with quiet energy. Maps layered the walls, digital screens glowed with data feeds, and a dozen agents moved with the coordinated focus of people who had been waiting weeks for this moment. Vera stood at the center of the room beside her father, both dressed in tactical blacks, both calm, but undeniably ready. She looked different today, sharper, steadier, more certain of herself. Or perhaps Dylan thought he was simply seeing her more clearly now. The general gestured toward the screen. Resnick's network has been compressed into a corner. You were right, Mercer. The courier model exposed them. A red dot blinked repeatedly near a warehouse district 2 towns over. Last night, Vera continued, we intercepted the courier. He confirmed the meeting point. Resnick is scheduled to transfer both weapons and intel at 0600 hours. Dylan checked his watch. 5:17 a.m. Close. Too close. But manageable. We've moved all teams into position, Vera said. Your contribution got us here. Today, we end this. Dylan didn't nod. He didn't smile. He simply absorbed the information the way he always had, the way a SEAL's mind moved, calculating, assessing, readying. What's my role? He asked. You've already done it, General Hart answered. Your analysis narrowed the targets. Your insights exposed their pattern. Today is execution, not theory. A faint easing washed through Dylan's chest. He didn't want to leave his daughter, didn't want to re-enter tactical chaos, but he did want resolution, real lasting resolution. For safety, the general added, I've assigned an additional protective detail to Harper Junction. Faye will be guarded until Resnick is apprehended. Dylan exhaled slowly. Good. That was good. Vera approached him, hands clasped lightly in front of her. You'll stay here with me, she said, monitoring live feeds, providing real-time analysis. You're the one who understands how Resnick thinks. Dylan met her eyes. Something passed between them. Gratitude, trust, understanding deeper than words. She had insisted he stay back. She had insisted he stay safe. For Faye. And he suspected for her. At 5:58 a.m., the feed from the drone flickered into crystal clarity. Resnick arrived. Tall, brutal, confident, the kind of man who believed he owned every shadow he walked through. The SWAT team moved into positions around the warehouse, their silhouettes merging with darkness, every second stretched thin with tension. Vera stood beside Dylan, elbow nearly brushing his. She watched the screens with razor-edged focus, but beneath it, he sensed her nerves quiet, controlled but present. He leaned slightly closer. "You ready?" She inhaled once, always. And then, the move. Explosive breach. Flash of smoke, shouts, the thunder of boots. Dylan leaned in, eyes narrowing as the feed split into quadrants, each showing a different angle of the takedown. "Left flank too slow," he murmured. "Resnick will go for the east exit. Copy." Vera said, immediately signaling into her comm. "Team Charlie shift to east exit now." A beat later, Resnick burst through the east door, rage burning in his eyes. But the officers were waiting for him. 3 seconds. 4. The takedown was clean, efficient, decisive. No shots fired, no injuries, no chaos. Just the quiet, controlled dismantling of a dangerous man's empire. Dylan exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The general's voice broke through the room. "Resnick is in custody. His network is dismantled. Outstanding work, everyone." Relief rippled subtly through the team. Vera turned to Dylan, eyes bright, breath trembling slightly with adrenaline. "We did it," she whispered. "No," he corrected softly. "You did it." But she shook her head. "We did it together." Later, after the dust had settled and the teams dispersed, the general approached Dylan. The two men stood near the exit, sunlight spilling across the concrete floor. "You not only saved my daughter, the general said you helped bring down a threat that's plagued us for months." Dylan remained still. Praise had never inflated him. If anything, it made him uncomfortable. "You kept your family safe," the general added. "And in doing so, you kept others safe as well." Dylan nodded once. "I just want Faye to have her life back. And she will," the general promised. He extended his hand, not as an officer, but as a father. Dylan shook it firm and respectful. When the general left, Dylan and Vera walked out together into the soft morning light. The facility behind them hummed with residual energy, but the world outside felt new, alive, hopeful. Vera turned toward him. "I'm glad you stayed out of the field today," she said. "You didn't need to put yourself in danger. Not now. Not anymore." "You did enough for both of us," Dylan replied. She laughed softly, a sound he had never heard from her before. It was warm, relieved, almost playful. There was a pause, then gentle lingering. "What happens now?" she asked. "For you," he said. "A long report, probably a medal." She smiled. "And for you?" He looked toward the horizon where sunlight spilled like new promise across the sky. "For me, a new start." Her voice softened. "For all of us, I think." Their eyes met. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like something beautiful had begun to unfold. Not because the danger was gone, but because they had faced it together and emerged standing side by side. A new dawn, a new hope, a new path quietly waiting for them both. Spring sunlight filtered through the apple tree in Dylan Mercer's backyard, scattering flecks of warm gold across the grass where Faye played with her stuffed rabbit. The air smelled faintly of cut wood and fresh soil, a scent that usually meant home peace, safety. Today, it meant something more. It meant possibility. For weeks, the tension that had once wrapped itself around their lives had slowly loosened. With Resnick in custody and his network dismantled, Harper Junction breathed easier. Patrol cars no longer circled the neighborhood. Dylan no longer felt eyes watching from the tree line. Even the house itself seemed lighter, as if the walls had finally exhaled. Yet despite the return of peace, something inside Dylan hadn't settled. Not in a restless, troubled way. In an awakening way. A way he didn't fully understand until he saw her again. The gate creaked softly. Dylan looked up from the workbench where he'd been sanding down a piece of wood for Faye's latest school project. Vera Hart stood in the opening. Sunlight, catching in her hair, her posture relaxed in a way he had never seen before. No rigidness, no unreadable mask. Her uniform had been replaced with a simple navy shirt and jeans, and somehow that made her look even stronger. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said gently. Dylan wiped sawdust from his hands. "You're never interrupting." Her eyes softened at that, an expression so warm, so unguarded, he felt something inside his chest shift. Before either could speak again, Faye spotted her. "Vera," she cried, sprinting across the yard. She launched herself forward, and Vera caught her with ease, laughing as she lifted the little girl into her arms. That laugh, Dylan hadn't known how much he needed to hear it again until now. "Daddy built me a fairy house," Faye announced proudly. "Oh, did he?" Vera asked. "Well, I need a full tour then." Faye grabbed her hand, immediately tugging her toward the apple tree. Dylan watched them, arms crossed lightly, feeling a warmth bloom in his chest. He hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not since before deployments. Not since before loss. Not since before life had carved him into a quiet protector instead of a man who let himself hope. When Faye ran off to fetch her crayons, Dylan and Vera finally found themselves standing alone beneath the apple blossoms. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what this meant." He tilted his head slightly. "What this means," Vera exhaled a slow, steady release of breath that carried more truth than words. "For months, I've been living in a world where every choice was tactical. Every thought was strategic. Every feeling was secondary." She looked at her hands, then back up at him. "You changed that." Without even trying, Dylan swallowed his gaze steady. "Vera, I didn't do anything except try to keep my daughter safe." She stepped closer. "No, you kept me safe. And you kept your humanity through all of it. That's rarer than you think." There it was, that connection. Quiet. Simple. Undeniable. He didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. The air between them said everything. The back gate creaked again, and General Donovan Hart stepped into the yard. He was out of uniform as well. Khakis, a light jacket, the relaxed posture of a man who finally had permission to breathe. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. Vera rolled her eyes. "Dad? You didn't even text." "I wanted to see the man who somehow solved a federal investigation while raising a 7-year-old, the general replied, with a hint of a grin. Dylan shook his hand. "Good to see you, General." "Donovan," he corrected. That single word held meaning, acknowledgement, respect, permission to move forward not as a subordinate or asset, but as a man he trusted. The general glanced around the yard, his eyes settling on Vera. "She's happier," he said quietly. Dylan nodded. "She deserves to be." Donovan's expression softened just enough to reveal the father beneath the medals. "Take care of her," he said simply. And though the general didn't elaborate, Dylan understood exactly what he meant. After Donovan left, and Faye resumed decorating her fairy house, Vera and Dylan walked toward the porch. The afternoon breeze rustled through the trees, lifting a few blossoms that drifted like soft confetti around them. Vera leaned against the railing. "I keep replaying everything. The diner, the investigation. the late-night briefings, every moment we worked together. It changed something in me. Dylan joined her. Changed what she looked up at him, eyes shining not with fear or confusion or adrenaline, but with something tender and entirely human. I stopped seeing you as the man who saved me, she said, and started seeing you as the man I want to walk beside. The words hit him like a slow-moving wave, gentle, warm, overwhelming in the best possible way. He reached out, brushing a stray blossom from her hair. "You're something else," you know that Vera laughed softly. "I hope that's a good thing." It is. They fell into silence, then a warm, peaceful silence that didn't need to be filled. Because something was happening. Something real. Something neither of them had expected, but both of them wanted. Faye came bounding over, dragging both adults by the hand toward her fairy house. "Can we all have dinner together?" she asked brightly. Like, all three of us. Dylan looked at Vera. Vera looked at him. And in that tiny, spontaneous request from a child, something clicked into place. A family didn't always begin with blood. Sometimes it began with a moment. And sometimes with a simple, hopeful question from a little girl. "I'd like that very much," Vera whispered. Dylan smiled slow and warm. So would I. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden rays across the yard, the three of them stood together beneath the apple blossoms. No danger looming. No shadows, hiding no fear in their hearts. Just the beginning of something beautiful. Something healing. Something that felt for the first time in a long time like home. And Dylan finally understood. The miracle wasn't that he had saved Vera. The miracle was that somehow she and Faye had saved him too. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of today's story touched your heart the most? Your stories and reflections mean the world to us. If you enjoy heartfelt tales about quiet courage, kindness, and second chances, we warmly invite you to join our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing uplifting stories to your home each week. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. We're honored to have you here, and we hope to see you again in the next story.